Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session. My name is Vorstermans. I've spent my whole life in the telecom industry and in the tech industry. I've started in research, I did negotiations, and I've basically done all the functions that you can imagine in a company, except I think, I've done HR, except legal. 2 years ago, I finally became an entrepreneur when I was 52. And I started with my company, Qunova. What do? I basically advise companies, but I also invest in startups. Now, to do that, I've started with my own money, but of course, your own money runs out relatively quickly. I'm kicking off a fund which is called VentureWise with a few partners, and we are raising approximately 25 to 30 million for that fund at the moment. It's not there yet, so please don't call me for lots of money yet. Now, if you want to do a startup, you normally start with an idea. Okay, you have a good idea, you want to change the world, and if somewhat possible, to become rich is not a bad thing either. That's what you think when you start, of course. Now, it's not just about the idea. It takes a lot more than the idea. Having a good idea is important, but it's definitely not enough. And it's also very easy to fall in love with your own idea. And I'll come back to that. When do you have a successful startup? It takes more than just an idea. Of course, we want $1 billion or €1 billion company in this case, because we're in Europe. And there are plenty of examples there. Now, I hate to tell you this, but your chance is 1 in 40,000. If you look at the number of all the startups in the world, if you look at how many become $1 billion company, it's probably worse than this because I've only took the US figures. So if you add Europe and Asia, it's going to be a little bit worse than that. So your chance of building $1 billion company is there, but it's slim. Now, I think if you start a company, you shouldn't have the goal of becoming $1 billion company. You should have the goal of becoming a successful company. And that doesn't mean you have to have a valuation of €1 billion. So what's your probability in this horse race? It's about 38% of tech survive longer than 4 years. That means that, what's the opposite of 38? 72? 62. Fail during the first 4 years. I mean, I'm investing already in a couple of startups. I've been doing this for 2 years. I've invested now in 6, 7 startups. One of them already failed. I basically lost all my money on that. Now, what are the reasons for failure? First of all, doing a startup is very much like a horse race. You have to have a horse, which is the product, your idea. What is it that you want to sell? You have to have a jockey, which is the team. You have to have a good team, otherwise you're not going to make it. But of course, you need to find a track to race on. If there is no track, you can have the best horse and the best team. It's not going to work. You're not going to win anything. And that's really the first reason for failure of all the startups that we see, is that there is no market need. I have seen a lot of companies that come to me and say, Jan, we have a great idea. We have a working product, we have a test case, but there is not necessarily a market for it. So the first concern is, if you have an idea, does somebody wants to buy that from you, and do they want to pay you for that? Team is, of course, very important, and there are some other main reasons. Running out of cash. If nobody believes in you, and you can't sell your idea to investors, you're going to fail. Now, there's a lot of myth in terms of entrepreneurship. So let me try to debunk a number of that. The first myth is that you have to be a dropout of school and you have to be young. If you're over 35, you don't even bother. Yeah. Now, the average age of successful entrepreneurs, I'm starting with successful entrepreneurs, not the ones that fail, the ones that have success, is 40 years old. That's the average. Obviously, there are people, and they make the newspapers, that are 21, 22. Some of the big billion-dollar companies are run by guys like that when they started. But it's not the average. You have to come from either a rich family or you have to be a poor guy that, the only way of success is running that company. It's only 99% of the people that run successful companies come from the middle class. Starting, don't bother working for a company, that's bureaucracy, that's all that stuff. In fact, the great majority of people that are successful in running a business have worked at least 6 years, or some of them, of course, more, in a company, doing experience. Again, my dropout argument. 75% of the successful entrepreneurs were successful in school and successful in university. So don't drop out, try to get your degree. And it's not the Holy Spirit, and it's not, we're going to change the world that makes successful entrepreneurs. It's basically people that are fed up with the corporate life. 60% of them, that's their motivation of becoming an entrepreneur. Now, there's a very smart saying, and this is not mine, but basically, choose a job you like, and you will never have to work. From Confucius. Okay, let me give some, I hope there are some people that want to start a business or have recently started a business. Let me give you some advice. Forget the stats. The stats are there, they're stacked up against you. But obviously there are a lot of successful companies out there, successful startups. So believe in that, believe in yourself and forget the stats. But also very important is take a problem that really, really, really bothers you. Because if it really, really, really bothers you, it's probably going to bother a lot of other people. And if it bothers a lot of other people, you will have a market for your product. But also, if you want to do something in cars, and you know nothing about cars, you might not be the right problem to fix that problem. Even if it's a problem that bothers a lot of people, you might not be the right person. So make sure you have the skills, the experience, you build up your team to make sure that you can tackle that problem. The team is very important. In the US, a lot of investors are saying, we invest in the team, not in the product. And they do. And they invest only in people, especially the later stage VCs, which we'll come to in a minute. A lot of those guys invest only in people that have already done a successful business. But in the end, basically make sure that you know what your strategy is and that you know what your funding requirement is. Bruno will talk later, and he will talk about, he has basically bootstrapped his own company without external funding. And in some cases, that's the best route. But you have to set that strategy before you start. You have to know what funding requirements you will get, because your strategy will depend on that. Now, what's the role of angels, VCs, and all those guys? And if you look at the company, you have a quite straightforward, beginning of a company. You start with an idea, you incubate, you do some trials with customers, you have a minimum viable product, you finally launch a product, then you scale, you go global, and then you grow. I'm an early stage guy, so I focused on the first stages of the company, but obviously in the growth phase there are many, many, many rounds of financing. Typically, the first phase is one of the most difficult. You have to have an idea, but you have to find the money to fund that. You can find it at the government, but typically it's the 3 F's, friends, fools, and family. Maybe not necessarily in that order, fools might become less. It's very important that you have friends, family, and fools supporting you. Because if somebody needs to come in after that and has to invest in you, especially if you haven't ever done a business before, if you can't persuade the ones that love you, to invest in you, why would I? Business angels come in. They typically are people that have done a successful career, have made some money, and are interested to helping young people or people that want to start their own business. And they typically do a few $100K. They're out there. It's not easy to identify them. It's not easy to find them. But there are networks. There's several networks in Belgium, and several networks in the US, several networks in many European countries. And then you have a gap, because before you get into a global and growth phase, where the venture capitalists will be very interested in you, you have this gap between a few $100,000 that you have raised and the 2 or 3 or 4 or more millions that you need. And that's where early stage VCs come in. And quite frankly, there are not many. Especially in Europe, early stage VCs are very, very few. One of the reasons I started this business is to become an early stage VC, because in Europe, that's still a new type of business. In the US, it's better. But still, the gap of finding those first 1 to 2 million is difficult. Obviously, you also have possibilities of crowdfunding. I'm not going to get into crowdfunding. I hope somewhere in this elaborate conference that somebody is talking about crowdfunding. But there's, again, several types of crowdfunding, but it can help, but it will rarely suffice to give you, all the money that you look for. But, let's ask the basic question, do you need external advisors? It depends on a number of factors. What is your business? Is it capital intensive? Even if you do a lean startup, you quickly need a few guys to develop, you need to do some marketing, you quickly need a few million euros. It also depends on your market. Is it a market where your product is sold quickly? So the sales cycle's short, do you get your money quickly in? It depends on your ambition. And again, the next speaker will talk about that, I think, Bruno, correct? You might be fine to say, okay, I'm fine that my company in 5 years is 5 to 10 million euros. But you can say, no, in 5 to 10 years, I want to be number 2 in my market. I want to be a 100 million euro company. I want to be growing fast. And then obviously, in most of the cases, you need more money. It also depends on your own means. The more, if you can work 2 or 3 years without money, and if the people around you are willing to work 2 or 3 years without being paid, obviously you don't need to fund that. And it basically increases your bootstrap capabilities significantly. Now, assuming that you do need money, investors like money do not grow on trees. Investors have also their own interest in mind, not yours necessarily. I always say growth and comfort do not coexist. If you want a comfortable life, don't go and talk to the investors. They will make your life hell. They will abuse you, they will throw you out of the room, they'll do many things that will get you very depressed. But in the end, if you need money, that's something you have to do. But it's not comfortable. Again, I talked about team, people matter. The people that you have in your team, the way you represent yourself, obviously also the click and the synergies that you can create with the investors. And get the right type of funding. There's convertible loans, there's equity, there's all kinds of different loans and different funding mechanisms. You have to make sure, and you have to have somebody in your team that can help you. And in a lot of cases, that's done to a business angel connection that can help you, that has the experience to get that. Now, on the other side, what do investors look for? If you go and talk to an investor, it's like doing a presentation, it's like talking to customers. Before you go, you have to know what they want. Basically, they will want to ask your strategy, your business plan, what's the market like you're playing in, what's the market size, how do you go to market, what's your product, do you have IP, and all of that stuff. I think that's a normal question. You should know that. You should know what you want to do. It's not always easy to answer the questions like, how do you go to market? Because in the beginning, you're focused on your product, you're focused on your first customers, which in most cases are local, but then you want to expand. How are you going to do that? Team, I'm not going to dwell on that. Financials, they want to see your 5-year plan. And the reason why the 5-year plan is important, it is not about the figures. It's not about the figures that are in there. It's about the assumptions you have put in. Never tell, by the way, an investor, by the way, my market penetration figures are conservative. Yeah, investors hear that all the time. And what does it mean if you say, these are my assumptions on market penetration, that makes sense. But it also allows the investor to see into the startup and the founder's mind. How is he thinking? Is he ambitious? Is he not ambitious? Is he overly optimistic? Yeah? I see a lot of business plans and they say, we are going to conquer the world and we need 750,000 euros. Impossible, that's bullshit. Sorry for the strong words, but you can't conquer the world quickly, at least, with 750,000 euros in funding. Because conquering the world is a big, big, big marketing push. And people tend to forget that. They will also ask about exits and returns. Again, they are not in there as a founder, they're in there as investors. And sooner or later, they will want some of their money back, if you're successful, obviously. And typically we talk about the X factor. Do you give us a 2x, a 3x, a 10x? That means, the exit value divided by the entry value. It's important that you understand how these investors think to be able to, tell them what they want to hear. And it's not, you will not be able to say, we're going to do this or that. They will ask details about how are you going to do that? How are you going to get there? So how to raise funding? I mean, okay, you've established all of that. You know in your mind how to approach investors, what to say. You have your story. First of all, where are you going to find these investors? You need people to introduce you to an investor. An introduction into an investor is more important than just cold calling. You have to make sure that you get noticed. There are some dangers to that, and I'll come to that in a minute. But also you have to know who would you like to be an investor in your company. Because it's not only about the money, it's about what this investor can do for you. Opening doors, introducing you again to other people, to other investors. You have to make sure that you are able to explain your business in the time it takes the elevator to get to the 5th floor. It has to be simple. You don't have to get into all the details, because quite frankly, most investors don't take the time in the first phase to understand all the details. So they want to understand, what are you saying? What is the business? Explain it to me, simply. A good way to try this, if you have children, if you're young, you might do it with your brother or sister's children, or with your brothers or sisters in some cases. If a 7-year-old can understand it, then you can explain it to an investor. You have to be very simple about your differentiators. What makes me different from all the other startups that we see in the investor business? One of the big things is, if you have to say, I don't know, hey, that's okay, you can't know everything. If you have to say to half of the questions, no, you're not ready to be an entrepreneur. You have to know your data. You have to, if you say, I think the market size is that big, how do you come to that figure? Yeah, it's something I read on the internet. No, it doesn't work. You have to have data to underpin your statements. You have to be persistent, and that comes back to the last point on my slide here. The first thing you do is you take some of the investors where you think they're never going to invest in me, and that's the guys you go and pitch to. They will be negative, but they will give you a lot of feedback that you can use and adapt your presentation, adapt your pitch to the ones that you think might invest in you. And it takes persistence. Yeah? You get defeated all the time, but you can't give up, because it only takes one good investor to create a company and to bring your company to the next level. Like I said, there are some things that you shouldn't be doing in front of an investor. Yeah? And the first thing is something that especially people that have a technology background do. They go on and on about the technology, how great their technology is, and nobody has that technology. And that's not unimportant, but it's not the only thing that you should focus on. Team, product, market are very important themes. Not everybody is a Steve Jobs. Don't be a CEO rock star. I mean, don't be humble and shy, but don't be a rock star saying, hey, I'm going to make it. You have the opportunity here to invest in my company, what a favor I'm doing you. Probably the investor is going to say, do somebody else a favor. Don't present a huge spending budget. Everybody will say, prove yourself first. If you've proven yourself, then we can talk about more money. But first, let's see if you can sell to a few customers, to real customers. Let's see if you can make the revenues in your plan. Let's see if you can make the revenues for the first year. This is a funny one. I always laugh about this because I see startups coming to me, business cares. I'm a growth hacker. I'm a rainmaker. Don't do that, is my advice. Because an investor will say, how are customers going to react to that? If you're in the B2C business with consumers, and consumers don't get to meet you, that's okay. But again, it has to do with this, don't be a rock star. Be normal. That's in most cases, it's crazy enough. And this is I'm on the board of some of the companies. Don't let the board members run your company. You are responsible, nobody else. If the board members start to run your company, it's because they're not happy with you. That should be a very big alarm signal. As I said, the first thing to do, assuming you found money, you can run for 1 or 2 years, is to basically see how you do in the first 2 years. most of the startup companies I'm in, they're all very over-optimistic about the revenues and underestimate the costs. A good thing that most investors take that into account when they invest, but that leads to some interesting discussions about the valuations of the company. 98% of the companies fall short of meeting projections in the first 2 years. It's a fact. 80% fail to see projected returns, and 40% lose all investments, or most of the investments. Like I said, for me today it's 1 out of 6, but most of them are not yet fully in the 2 years. And my message here is, okay, you can have a vision, and you can even be very good at explaining that vision and getting people on board with that vision. But it's not just about leadership. The simple management techniques that you learn in corporate business are very important. Planning, progress reports, KPIs, doing evaluations with your team. All that kind of stuff remains important also in a startup company. It doesn't have to lead to a big bureaucracy, but that doesn't mean that you cannot apply these management techniques. All right, I'll leave you with a few things to remember. I like this one. If you've met 50 business angels and 17 investors and 100 possible customers, and nobody wants to buy the product, and nobody gets your ID, you know what? Maybe it's time to get onto another ID. This is my formula for success. Write it down and never forget it. Product, market, team. And then my cosmological constant, L, which is basically the luck factor. You need some luck. I mean, Facebook has had a lot of luck to get in the position where they are now. They were in a space which was dominated by MySpace. At one moment in time, one MySpace consumer committed suicide because she was pestered on MySpace. Without that, it might be, the situation might be reversed. MySpace might now be what Facebook is. Network like crazy. Network with investors. Network with people that can help you. Network with people that can work for you. Network with possible customers. Network like crazy. I think events like this, obviously, are a good place to do that. Now, the next thing I want you to remember is if you WhatsApp with me, that's my WhatsApp status. A good traveler is always ready to change his plan. People who have traveled a lot know shit happens, you know? The train is not there, the plane is cancelled, the hotel has no room for you, you're too late, it's overbooked, etc., etc. You have to be mentally ready to say, okay, this has happened, let's not dwell on it, what do we do? And last but not least, don't forget to dream. Because without dreams, you know, most of those billion-dollar companies wouldn't be there. Now, I'll leave you with 2 statements. In all of this, never lose your cool. Forget, you know, keep pushing. Like I quote here, and this is a quote from somebody who had sailed around the world. And if you've seen those guys, they get no sleep. Stamina is not to have the energy to keep going, it's to keep going when you have no energy. Remember that when you feel down, when you feel without energy, that's when really, you know, the strong stand up and continue. And don't lose your sense of humor. Okay? The joke there on the right is my favorite joke, by the way. It's a joke in English, but I hope you understand it. Okay? With that, I don't know if I have time for questions. I have time for questions. I was expecting a flood of questions.
Do you focus only in Belgium or in Europe?
With VentureWise, we focus on a number of European territories, and the areas where we focus is what we call the underserved areas. You know, it's like in the US, if you're in Silicon Valley, you'll find a lot of people to talk to and to invest in your company, even in a very early stage. If you're down in Arkansas, it will be more difficult. The same in Europe. Belgium is, for instance, a place which is underserved. There are places in Spain, Eastern Europe. We go there.
Would you consider South Africa or places in Africa?
No. Okay. It's basically a matter of proximity. We have to be able to get there in one day, get there and back. Otherwise, it's...
How do you maintain ownership of your startup if a venture capitalist steps in?
That's a good question. I always answer this, and it's not an easy question because it really depends how good your idea is. You have something which is really, really interesting, or not. And I always say to the people when I negotiate, you can choose to keep a big part of a small pie or a small part of a big pie. It's up to you. You can choose. I mean, the next speaker will talk about that. But it's a choice you have to make. You also have to make sure that the people that invest with you, that you can trust them. You have to build a trust relationship in both ways. It goes bi-directional, obviously, because the investor is not going to run the company. The investor has to trust you to, do something well with his money. But it's a choice you make. Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, I would like to introduce the next speaker, Bruno Lobaji from iText, the winner of many awards the last few months.